Elizabeth Taylor was one of the most visible women in Hollywood history, yet much of her emotional life unfolded far away from cameras, gossip columns, or public archives. While newspapers chronicled her marriages, divorces, and public romances, there existed an entire private world that was far more intricate, far quieter, and deeply human. This part of her life involved a small number of women whose presence shaped her emotional development, her self-knowledge, and her sense of safety outside the harsh lights of fame. These relationships, whether fleeting or lasting, were part of her real history, not simply as affairs, but as meaningful connections that revealed who she was behind the image. One of the earliest and most formative private relationships attributed to Taylor involved Greta Garbo in the early 1950s. Garbo was already retired from film and famously private, a woman who had withdrawn from Hollywood's demands long before the industry realized it had lost her. When she and Taylor crossed paths socially, the bond that reportedly formed between them seemed rooted in mutual understanding rather than romantic fireworks. Garbo had lived through and rejected the pressures that Taylor was only beginning to feel, and their quiet conversations offered Taylor a rare education in setting boundaries and constructing a private life. Whether their relationship ever moved into physical intimacy mattered far less than the influence it had on Taylor's thinking. Garbo lived on her own terms, and Taylor, still young and molded by studios, found in her a model of autonomy. Their interactions, discreet, infrequent, yet deeply meaningful, helped Taylor see that a life in the spotlight didn't have to mean surrendering every part of oneself. Taylor's private life continued to develop in ways that contradicted Hollywood's superficial stories, and this complexity became even more evident in her relationship with Marilyn Monroe during the mid-1950s. The film industry and media constantly tried to frame the two women as rivals, each supposedly competing for roles, attention, and the public imagination. In reality, the quiet moments they shared revealed something much more personal. Monroe felt constantly exposed, lonely, and misunderstood, while Taylor seemed to embody the kind of emotional stability Monroe craved. Taylor, in turn, admired Monroe's vulnerability and honesty. Their private interactions were gentle, conversational, and trusting. They found comfort in each other because both knew what it meant to be reduced to symbols. Their bond did not need longevity to matter. Even as their lives diverged, they carried mutual respect and affection that endured long after their last meetings. Taylor later spoke of Monroe with a softness that suggested their connection had been something the public never recognized. During the same decade, Taylor's life became deeply intertwined with her close friend Montgomery Clift. Their bond is well documented, but the private emotional triangle that formed around him is seldom discussed. After Clift's catastrophic 1956 car accident, Taylor became one of the primary figures in his recovery. At the same time, another woman, a friend and companion who had been publicly linked to Clift to preserve his privacy, was also deeply involved in his care. The closeness that developed during this period created a unique emotional environment. All three of them shared an intimacy formed through crisis, exhaustion, fear, and unwavering loyalty. In that emotionally charged atmosphere, Taylor and the other woman reportedly developed their own connection, something both tender and complicated, with Clift fully aware and, by some accounts, quietly understanding. It was a response born not out of scandal, but out of shared responsibility and emotional dependency. When Clift's recovery stabilized, the triangle dissolved naturally, but the depth of what they experienced influenced Taylor's understanding of unconventional relationships and the many shapes love can take. In the early 1960s, Taylor's marriage to Eddie Fisher added an even more complex chapter. The era was turbulent, not only because the relationship had begun under intense public scrutiny, but also because Fisher's personal and professional life was unraveling. During this time, Fisher's young personal assistant became a crucial presence in the household. She was someone who saw Taylor and Fisher every day and understood the growing cracks in their marriage better than anyone. As Fisher's emotional distance increased, Taylor reportedly found warmth, attentiveness, and steadiness in the assistant. The relationship that developed was shaped by proximity and trust. The assistant provided companionship during a period when Taylor felt isolated despite being constantly in the public eye. Their connection was private, discreet, and deeply personal. It did not last long, however, because Taylor's burgeoning relationship with Richard Burton soon overtook everything in her life. The assistant was quietly moved out of the picture through studio negotiations and non-disclosure arrangements, a common industry practice at the time. Yet, this brief connection demonstrated once again that Taylor sought emotional safety where she could find it, not just where society expected her to look. Around the same period, Taylor's friendship with Rock Hudson was strengthening into one of the deepest and most enduring bonds of her life. Hudson relied heavily on a trusted confidant, a skilled costume designer who frequently traveled with them, worked on set near them, and served as a stabilizing presence in their shared circle. For Taylor, this woman represented comfort, confidentiality, and intelligence. Her presence offered Taylor a rare kind of normalcy, someone who understood the demands of fame but was not part of the chaos. Over time, the relationship between Taylor and this companion reportedly shifted into something more intimate. What made it notable was its longevity. Unlike some of Taylor's other private relationships, which flared brightly and then tapered off, this one lasted across years and through various phases of her life. It never became public, never made headlines, and never threatened her professional image. In many ways, the quiet nature of the relationship made it more meaningful. It fit seamlessly into Taylor's life because it required no performance. It was something she could carry privately without fear of exposure. As Taylor moved into the late 1960s and early 1970s, her life became increasingly chaotic with marriages, divorces, reconciliations, and constant scrutiny. It was during this time that one of her most intimate relationships developed. Not with another star or industry figure, but with a housekeeper who traveled with her, lived in her homes, and shared her daily routines. The household staff of major Hollywood celebrities often had access to sides of their employers that no one else saw. This housekeeper became someone Taylor confided in, trusted, and relied on emotionally in ways that surprised even those close to her. The emotional connection that developed was rooted in companionship and a sense of being understood without judgment. The housekeeper provided consistency at a time when Taylor's life was unpredictable. Their relationship lasted for an extended period and became one of the most stable sources of comfort Taylor had during those years. When Taylor's personal life shifted again, and she returned to the cycle of public relationships and reconciliations, the housekeeper's role came to an end. As with many of Taylor's private companions, she was provided financial support and a carefully arranged exit that maintained privacy for both of them. Taken together, these 6 relationships form a portrait of a woman whose emotional life was far more complex than her public persona allowed. They reveal that Taylor was not driven solely by dramatic romances with famous men or the spectacle of her marriages. Instead, she continually sought connection, understanding, and emotional safety. These relationships with women did not follow a single pattern. Some were brief encounters sparked by shared loneliness or stress. Some were long-term bonds developed through years of trust. Some were responses to emotional crises, while others were expressions of genuine affection and companionship. What becomes clear is that Taylor's private relationships often offered what her public ones could not: stability, empathy, and protection from the relentless pressures of fame. She gravitated toward people who provided emotional grounding, whether they were iconic actresses, vulnerable stars, caretakers under stress, trusted professionals, or members of her household staff. Her connections with these women were not defined by spectacle, but by the human need to be seen and understood without the distortions of celebrity. These relationships also highlight the restrictive environment of mid-20th century Hollywood. Public same-sex relationships could end careers, and the studios had extensive systems in place to manage scandals. Confidential settlements, non-disclosure agreements, arranged travel, and carefully orchestrated cover stories were all part of the way the industry protected its stars while maintaining its own image. Within this system, Taylor learned to create private pockets of freedom. These hidden relationships were not only about desire, but also about survival, emotional balance, and self-preservation. Understanding Taylor through this lens does not diminish her public romances or her marriages, nor does it sensationalize her private life. Instead, it expands our understanding of her as a human being who lived in the tension between public myth and personal truth. She was a woman who loved deeply, who made mistakes, who protected the people she cared about, and who found solace where she could. These hidden relationships remind us that even the most glamorous lives contain layers the public seldom sees, layers of vulnerability, longing, curiosity, and need. Elizabeth Taylor's connections with these 6 women are not footnotes or rumors meant to shock. They are part of the intricate story of a woman who spent her life searching for emotional refuge in a world that gave her very little. They help us understand her choices, her resilience, and the quiet battles she fought behind the scenes. Her private life was not defined by scandal, but by the constant human pursuit of connection, trust, and belonging.